Dear friends, once again, good afternoon. Hopefully, you're not yet tired of this forum. This is a concluding panel with a simple title, The Technologies of the Future. And I do recall the way we started the Finopolis series of conferences back in 2015 in the city of Kazan, where we were saying that we would like to launch such a forum as a platform where financial institutions, our banks, and IT representatives were to convene, because that was who we saw there, and the regulators, because communication was going on there, but very fragmented. And after that, we were able to see the kind of journey that we were able to go through. I mean, partnership between the financial institutions and tech companies. It's almost impossible to discern one from another, because the banks sometimes are called tech companies. Tech companies are moving into the financial sector. Then we're going through the period when we were considering Finopolis forum, where the market players and regulators could work out key projects that we were supposed to do within 1 or 2 years. That was the Sochi period. And I recall the previous forum had 4 tasks. Olga, during the previous session here, announced 7.5 one, although she shared that accountability with the Minister of Communication. So that was doubling down on what needs to be done, and we'll try and do this. But I would very much like Finopolis to also become the place where we would not fear to look into the future, where we will discuss the technologies of the future. And so I would very much like this plenary session to be a visionary exercise, if you will, because the time when financial institutions were being considered as very conservative, although very sound, but nevertheless conservative in terms of nature, has certainly gone into a deep past. The financial organizations are the kind of organizations whose competitive advantage in the first place are humans and technology. Humans means technology. And it is very important to us in the financial area and in the innovative companies which operate along with the financial industry, where technologies are going, what kind of technology, because they continuously evolve, and our attitude towards them also changes. Because I remember the kind of tech trends we discussed several years ago at Finopolis. Some technologies seem to be the only one, and once here, they would change the whole world around overnight, and then it turned out that they were more of an exclusive kind of a niche thing, or would become everyday run-of-the-mill kind of a platform for specific applications. So the kind of tech horse you should put your bets on, and the financiers are very pragmatic people, is a big question. It's not accidental that we decided to choose this futuristic kind of a session so as to talk about technological trends. And many emerging technologies and trends, they seem to be derived of any practical meaning, because there are some hypes around, there are others that we do not notice because we can't understand how they can be applied in a financial industry. But nevertheless, they are being used, and so it would be great to understand it. And so it would be great during this panel to talk about the future technologies and also hypothesize about the possibility of practical applications. So let me introduce our panelists, traditionally, in alphabetical order. Vladimir Verkhoshinskiy, who heads the Alfa-Bank. He is the senior managing director. He came to run Alfa-Bank when the laurels of the best digital institution was something that both the major government players and leading tech companies claimed to have. And so effectively, they had to really fight and demonstrate his effectiveness and rethink various approaches. And Alfa has always been demonstrating something that made us be keen to find out more about technology. And so it would be great to hear what kind of technologies you are putting your bets on. Vladimir Efimov, Deputy Mayor of Moscow. We are in Moscow, and every day we do observe the way Moscow changes. New subway stations, new parks, new appearance that the streets acquire, and that really impresses both Muscovites and the guests of the city. But that is the tip of an iceberg. I'd say that more fundamental and deeper changes are taking place in a way that the eye doesn't behold underneath the hood, so to say, and that applies both to the businesses and citizens. Well, I'm sure that the citizens do notice digital services, digital education, digital healthcare, and many other things. And Moscow is indeed an example of us saying, coming true out of the things that many are just thinking as theory. Mikhail Kovalchuk, the president of the Kurchatov Nuclear Institute. Me personally, I'm very impressed by Mr. Kovalchuk, by his ability to see the human progress, to observe such global themes and monitor the human progress and knowledge as a single body, to see the rationale and trends in it and view technologies as part of the common for all humans move into the future. Hopefully, it is going to be good. And so the Kurchatov Institute, one of the core nuclear research institutions, actually became one of the biggest interdisciplinary research centers. And I hope that your view will help us step above the sectoral issues, which often restrict our vision so as to cast a broader look at things. Sergey Shvetsov, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Moscow Exchange. Sergey and I worked together for almost 10 years. I do not know any other person who could generate as many new ideas as Sergey. To us in Central Bank, he has always acted in the role of an inner futurist, a visionary. And nowadays, when the future is as nebulous as never before, we really miss you, Sergey, very much. And I would like to begin, nevertheless, our conversation by first addressing Mr. Kovalchuk as a reputable expert in technology development, as a visionary. What kind of key technology trends you can identify, the ones which may impact human progress, as well as the progress of the financial industry as part of the human future within the next 10 to 15 years, as well as possibly what kind of risks there may appear, what kind of new products and services that may emerge thanks to the technology innovations which will define our development. Thank you, Elvira. You know, I am amazed. Once I was walking through the halls out there to see what is exhibited, it was difficult to imagine. You almost end up in the future that the futurists were trying to draw up, but actually turned out to be real. And I would like to congratulate all of us upon such great successes. So this is reality. But simply because yesterday I was listening to the opening plenary session, and at times you would hear somebody saying that I'm an optimist, I'm a pessimist, and I will tell you that I'm a realistic person. And I must admit that I recall then, when in 2007 the president announced the first scientific project that was Nano Initiative, then I was having an interview to Spiegel magazine from Germany. And I had an opportunity to reread it again. And so the correspondent looking at me was saying, you are a great country trying to pretend that you're something, but actually you are just a gas station for the rest of the world. And I responded by saying, please tell me, what are the better things in Germany that you can do? And he, in an unexpected way, said, automobiles. And I said, just imagine that you have no resources, and roughly speaking, we are supplying you with everything, oil, gas, resources, and then you produce cars. In the past, you were producing Volkswagens, then you were displaced by the Japanese and Koreans. You produced expensive cars, and only the countries who earn super income from oil can afford it. So you are interested in high oil price. But most importantly, we are rich with God's grace, and that is the distribution between us. So he smiled back to me and we parted our ways, but I can tell you that right in front of our eyes, America turned into a resource-dependent country and a gas station, and only just 1.5 decades passed since then. And let's see why it happened. The fact of the matter is that we all forgot that the world is material, not virtual. We built a virtual world, and everyone apart from the American collective West have started believing in it, but the world is material. It has to accumulate. Every little piece and bit has to grow. Today, 1/3 of energy that is being produced in the world is spent just to maintain networking structures without industrial operation. So what digitalization means? It means a very dramatic growth in energy consumption. That is the first phase, I would say, of a selective distribution of civilization into the rich and the poor, into the energy-rich countries that can afford to buy energy. The rest will fall out from the nest of civilization, and later on I will even say it in a tougher, much tougher way. So the world is material, and the most important thing that the collective West was aware of, and the American in the first place, that the most important thing is to own resources, to control resources, because the resources is not only hydrocarbons. This is potable water, drinking waters. Global wars may become because of it. This is arable land, products, forests, and then hydrocarbons, and all of the mineral resources. And actually, I can tell you that China and us, in terms of the full spectrum of everything, are abundant with all resources, while collective West only 60% of that. And now what I would like to tell you, that the most important thing is to own resources, and everything is being done for that end. And you can do anything in order to attain it, in order to preserve your domination. What Americans do, they launch confusing notions. The first one is the ozone hole. Just remember how they were crying out right loud from the rooftops, and then they substituted Freon in metal bottles, and we forgot about it. They earned hundreds of billions of dollars, and everybody forgot about the ozone hole. Then the next big fraud scheme was warming. Well, of course, warming is the fact, but we've been watching over the weather 200 years long. Just hundreds of thousands of change in the sun activity, solar activity, may lead to all life being ended on Earth. But conditionally, you may agree with this warming. But there is a second conclusion that is being derived from it. This is related to the human anthropogenic activity, CO2 emissions. And then the whole economy is being built on it. And so the renewable sources of energy is something that they're trying to convince you in. Electric cars. What is an electric car? This is a just straightforward scam, because they're trying to sell something to you with subsidization. But of course, if in Moscow we convert everything into EV cars, then we would be much better off. But if you don't produce any single car today, and if tomorrow morning all of the cars over the planet would be electrified, you need to triple the generation of power. It is impossible to do it. But let's imagine we did it overnight, and the next night we have this generation. It would mean mean that we would need to heat ourselves with coal, and we will die from acid rain in Moscow, in New York, in Paris. It's going to be nice and neat, but in some other cities, people are going to be dying like in China today. So that's the kind of picture that you may see. I can run this list, and then the low-carbon energy is being impressed upon you, then hydrogen economy, nuclear stations. So what you need to do is to completely confuse people. Like in Germany, 37% of German energy is nuclear-based, and so very consistently, step after step, through the Green Party that the Americans have instituted in order to keep their power, they have closed down nuclear energy, but that is a nonsense. But for that purpose, in order to achieve it, you had to really deceive people so that you could really impress anything into their consciousness. So that's the general background. Now, what is important, from 2010, when we were developing the nature-like technologies, the main conclusion was as follows, that today the world is moving, and the most important thing is to struggle for the resources. And if you follow today's technology framework, then we will be moving only towards one outcome: bloody fight for access to resources, which will start from fighting for drinking water, and then would entail many other things. And that was when we came up with a principally new proposals to move towards nature-based order. I will give you an example. For example, we've got a supercomputer in the Kurchatov institution, and you are familiar with the following thing. It's a heating device rather than a computational. For example, you have a supercomputer, and then you've got kilometers of cooling system lines. So effectively, that is producing heat. And just a couple of years ago, the capacity of one human brain started equaling the capacity of all of the supercomputers in the world. Definitely, we did something wrong. But the human brain, the small organ that created everything under the moon, consumes only 10 watts at peak and 30, up to 30 sometimes, but this is not the case for everybody. So altogether here, I would say each of us will consume 30, so we went the wrong way, while effectively one needs to recreate a living nature. So without getting into details, but nature-based solution is to create the kind of systems which would consume exactly the way nature does. Now, what is very important, simply because there is a game without any rules and the fight for the markets, we are in a predicament, because on the one hand, it is important not to be deceived, very important, because we had this conversation about the hydrogen economy, great people, and saying that tomorrow they will start generating hydrogen, and they would be really pushing it down the pipelines here and there, and they forget about the fact that hydrogen and oxygen are flammable gases, and everything will blow up into the air in a second. So let me go to I will go to the hydrogen if I will get another minute. But what I would like to say is that being aware of it, very important, not to be the victim of a fraud, but also not to miss out on a new technology. But what you need for that is to have your own, based upon a deep scientific expertise, your own development agenda, rather than just trying to run in sacks for what is being sold to you as the ultimate gain. So, another thing, we always had a lot of scholars, but we didn't have enough people who could manage. I mean, back in the Soviet Union, science was great, but no management. So there was no innovative economy because nobody had any need for it. After that, we were able to fill in this vacuum, and today we have so many people who understand management and how to do that. But the importance of science diminished, and that means that people who can manage, these are important, great people for the market-based economy, but they don't care what they manage. And so now the important task we face, so for this pendulum, when, for example, there are many scholars and few managers, or more scholars or fewer scholars, we need to really create a balance. We had one successful experience. We had an individual who understood what, and that was Kurchatov, and we had a person who knew how, and that was Beria. And that was the most successful in the history of civilization, the most successful period of implementing scientific knowledge into industry, but that was a very tough mobilization model, and we ought to do it today in a different environment, and that is our most important task. Now, I think I've told you everything, most important thing that I wanted to. Let me now illustrate things. You might find it interesting. Look, hydrogen, everybody is running around. with hydrogen. I'm sitting at the government session, concept debate, and I'm sitting and listening, and I'm being bewildered because then I didn't understand that we're trying to, take the Mickey out of the West. Well, a few people were aware of it, but the whole issue was that the hydrogen energy emerged in the world in 1978 in the Kurchatov Institute. The then director of the Kurchatov Institute, my predecessor and the president of the Academy of Sciences, Anatoly Alexandrov, simply because the nuclear energy was simply just a regular flow. We were the best in the world, and we didn't know then how to switch the station during the night, during the day, and so we were thinking, what are we to do with the energy during the night? And so we decided to convert it into hydrogen in order to preserve the energy that was being produced. But so as to not just preserve hydrogen, we created a program in our institute, the first by then, Institute of Hydrogen Energy, 300 research centers throughout the country, and we were working on hydrogen for decades. We had steel plants which would produce the new steel in Tula, in Chernigov. We used to have everything, but we had two most important things. One of them, at the Ladoga Island, at the Ladoga Lake Island, still, there is a hydrogen safety testing ground where we are learning what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, so as, God forbid, something will happen at a nuclear station on someplace else. And secondly, everyone decided to go for transportation, and Tupolev Bureau and us produced the only hydrogen aircraft, Tu-155, which took off 5 times. Inside that aircraft, everything, instead of chairs, there are vessels containing liquid hydrogen at minus 270 Celsius, while the rest of the cabin is filled with helium, so as to avoid it getting exploded. Would you like to take such a flight? I invite you to. And why we did that? Because when we decided to launch our aircraft carriers, as opposed from Americans, we don't have any bunkering, for 100 different marine bases. And so what are we to supply the aircraft with? Jet fuel. So we decided that since this is a nuclear aircraft carrier, we can convert heat into hydrogen, and so, all right, a pilot will be able to take off from the deck, and he won't have far to fly. So, A, you need to know a lot, and B, you need to remember that we live in the greatest country in the world, and don't run around looking at what the West had decided, but rather ask the people who may still keep it in their mind and know, and we'll tell you that it was once in the past when we put a stop to this hydrogen hype, when Americans were trying to push it into our country with feet and hands, and we told them, all right, if you want to, we can put up the hydrogen gas stations almost tomorrow. So I'm going to conclude right now. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working on hydrogen and we shouldn't produce hydrogen engines or automobiles, but you have to move towards that conscientiously and relying upon a scientific base. And I will give you a very simple example. Elvira has always been me asking where to invest, what are we to do. I will give you an example. You need to invest into the nature-based solutions. And I will tell you one thing. Look, all of the living things, just think about it. This is the second fairy tale. We were being persuaded to inject underground CO2. I have friends who are trying to buy up land for that, printing money on that. All of the living things, if you take the biological thing, for example, a bird, a tree, a cow, these things are made up of CO2, from hydrogen, from oxygen, and nitrogen, plus metals. The 4 most important things. You plant a seed, and a tree grows out of it. You fertilize, and something grows out of it, a behemoth or a human being. So where does it all come from? Very simply, hydrogen and oxygen are taken from water, because water is hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is produced through photosynthesis from the green leaf, CO2, and carbon, that is being used to build it all. And nitrogen, you either have to get it out of air so as not to produce fertilizers, or you have microbiotic anaerobic bacteria which accumulates nitrogen. And here's an example for you. If we switch to that actively, the full biological processing, you don't need to have fertilizers, but in order to do that, you need to invest and develop photosynthesis so that artificially we can do it better than a green leaf, and then developing these colonies of anaerobic bacteria. And if you create such kind of a farming industry, then first thing, to process biomass, you can produce biofuels, and we have a full division that is dedicated to it. You produce biofuel, biojet fuel, for example, in the north, you can do it. And secondly, by processing it into the J milk acid, this whole mass, your whole chemistry is going to be green. You don't need any mineral resources or anything, and it's a renewable process. So here you are. Now, second thing. Second, well, now, Kurchatov Institute, as tasked by the president, is having many initiatives in energy synchronization and farming. I'm finishing right now. I've got 3 more sentences. Now, look, to nuclear project 2.0. Nuclear project 1.0 was the bomb, and then our great founding fathers created everything. Energy, submarines, vessels, power stations, and we kept all of the priorities because the priorities were defined correctly. So this year, the 80th anniversary is to the Kurchatov Institute and 120 years to Alexander Kurchatov. So it's going to be a great festivity because it was then when some of these scholars and the government made the right decision to define strategic priorities, and that is why we are amongst very few, if not the only one, the most sovereign nations on the world, because the nuclear project 1.0 was done. But the 2.0 is that the closed fuel cycle is nuclear energy and thermonuclear synthesis. And that is the second investment directive that we are currently doing together with the Rosatom agency. And the last thing that I would like to tell you, and it's my real concluding phrase. Look, today, the challenge, you must understand, the nuclear era is in the past, and everything that has been built upon it is wearing down because we're going to be killed by the different thing. COVID will come with 90% fatality, where 9 of those who contract out of 10 will die, and that is why we need to understand that bio threat is tangible. In this world, there are 2 biggest dangers: cyber and bio. So, in terms of cyber, don't take offense. I will tell you, with cybersecurity, if everything really is going bad, very easy. I will simply turn down the switch and it will disappear. No question about it. So cybersecurity is something that we do have because there's no other effective tool against a metal rod but the metal rod. So if you would be keen to do something about it, you can simply pull down the switch. But with biosecurity, you can't do anything about it. The Americans have surrounded us in all of the republics around us with the bio laboratories. So they can first produce endemic viruses which will kill cattle, undermine farming. For example, this is all handmade. So I can tell you that today we face new challenge, and that is why the Kurchatov Institute, along preserving our competitiveness and ensuring our future, we are the Institute of the 21st century, and we are the institute which researches living things, biology, medicine, biotechnologies, and that is the area of investment. So come around and we will tell you what to do about it. Thank you, Mikhail. A wonderful world of technologies, indeed. I guessed that technology is the core element in competition and financial institutions and the whole of the business. But that was indeed a much broader look at the fact that digitalization is very much resource intensive, because we were talking about the bitcoins and in terms of how much power it consumes. And so clearly many technologies are resource intensive, but unfortunately not not all of the nations which are resource-rich are technologically advanced, and so it would be great to understand what is the secret here. But you are very correct when saying that one shouldn't be deceived by technology, but at the same time, you shouldn't let the technology wave pass by, and we're trying to understand where are these technology trends. Well, for example, we were mentioning cyber, but let me tell you what is the first way that the civilization was split into the rich and poor, and that was through the energy resources. And that was digitalization, while the second is much tougher, biology. And you ought to understand the world where your bioweapons is imminent is going to be entered by the countries which already have been able to produce vaccine. And that is essentially only us and an additional couple of countries, while the rest of them are not able to join the club. Only if those who are producing it can sell it to. So the world has become ruthless. And that is the fact. Well, apart from resources, the capability to produce technology, because yesterday during the plenary meeting, we were discussing it. What is the secret of this high level of technology and fintech? We were able to very quickly adjust and adapt technology, not just copycatting them, but to really refining them further. And so we need to learn to produce our own technology solutions, and many are doing it, and that is crucially important. So I suggest that we should now ask Vladimir, and my question is also going to be about a broader kind of technology, not just fintech, so that we can grasp the picture that is around us, I mean, the financial world, but at a rudimental level. And I would like to address you the following question about the Moscow experience as a city, because Moscow on more than one occasion was mentioned in many rankings and ratings, top 10, the most beautiful cities in the world with the most developed municipal Wi-Fi services, digital services developing. Moscowites, whenever they end up being in other capital cities, they really miss the kind of services that used to enjoy in Moscow. We know that Moscow seriously invests into different advanced technologies. And so my question to you, we are talking about the need for technology development, that the resources are not enough. You've got a great resource, your status as the capital city, and you can rely upon these rurals. You've got enough finance, but what makes you continue investing into it? Could you just give us a very simple explanation? And what do you believe should be your priorities for the next 3 to 5 years? Because we observe the way the Moscow is developing so fast, and we understand that these cannot be chaotic. There are plans. Maybe you are familiar with these secrets of technology development that you are relying upon. And immediately here, my third question, yes, indeed, Moscow is a very well-developed city, and we would like the whole country to be so technologically developed. And so the question about the inequality of financial development is something that we would really regret to see developing into a digital gap, digital divide. But maybe you can share with us your secret in terms of what other cities, what other municipal, smaller cities can do in order for such a technological development to enjoy as well. Well, thank you very much. Speaking about setting the goals and what we see as the priority, definitely that is developing the kind of city that is going to be comfortable for its citizens. Because speaking about the capital city status, that means indeed a certain bonus that you must be able to dispose of in a proper way. Because whenever we compete for technologies, whenever we compete for the top skills, when we compete for setting up a very super modern production operations, we do it internationally, where Moscow acts as a bit of a hub, not only in terms of the capital city of the nation, but also as the kind of a hub which is a research and scientific and production hub. And so in such our endeavors, we are trying to improve the efficiency of the resources available to us as much as possible, investing not only into infrastructure, something that you began with, thank you so much, like beautification, creating the comfort for the people in the city, but also investing into digitalization, which enables us much faster, more effectively, at lesser cost and resource expense to arrive at a lot of great deliverables. Of course, we spend much more power and electricity, but the most important human resource is something that we also apply very effectively. For example, if we look at the way the city interacts with its people when providing public services, we all have gone through several stages on the way to pass through another one. I will mention it separately. When to begin with, we started converting our services into the digital, and we effectively were able to start the electronic mail exchange or signing up for various public services. Second part of it was when rendering such services, we substituted some of the functions that previously had been done by a human being to AI. And the second part of it is what we're trying to implement right now, which is providing most of these services which we see possible in real time, because nobody would ever imagine right now, in order to find out the balance of your plastic card and send a query into the bank, then wait for 30 days and only then see what is going on. That happens in real time. And so likewise here we can see that many services can be provided online without any delay. While the second component here is that many services through digitalization can be done proactively. You don't even have to request the public entity, because the government or the municipal agency can always see what the people in the city are doing and may decide what is required. And so the third thing, thanks to digitalization, is to provide super services, as we describe them, when we step away from trying to resolve a certain specific situation and move over to the live situation. So the first such super service that we launched was in our big renovation program, when we realized that with the growth of various tasks related to the relocation of people in the city, when we were commissioning new housing, we either need to increase the number of government employees or to automate this whole thing. So today we've got twice as less in the number of Moscow government employees who are able to support the relocation of the amount of people 5 times more. And so that means that in this program we're able to make sure that all of the paperwork required is collected very quickly. And by the time that somebody needs to be relocated, all of the paperwork is going to be ready. And all of such things enable us to comfortably interact with the people and utilize our resources much more effectively. By way of an example, in terms of the public services, I can share with you a few facts. The mos.ru portal, you are familiar with it, I mean, those who live in Moscow, contains the possibility to enjoy 380 different services, as well as from our partner organizations. And so the number of queries that MOSRU portal receives, more than 400 million a year. That means about 13 queries a second. Maybe comparing to the banks, that is not so much, because people, they go to bed during the night. Then during the business hours, when you generally see the maximum number of queries, we've got 30, 50 queries a second to receive different kinds of services. That would have been impossible to support. You can imagine the number of telephone call centers or telephone lines dedicated to it, as well as the operators who could just process all of it if it wasn't all digitalized. Now, other important things that we use in the work we do are the so-called digital city twins. We have created the city 3D mapping, to which all of the information resources were connected that the Moscow government has, and within the conferencing that we maintain to make various decisions. We can respond to various questions instantly rather than take our time to look into it, which enables us to really be very agile. And we are able to improve our efficiencies by 30%. I mean, you can run the list, but I would draw your attention to additional two things: healthcare and safety. In healthcare, we're actively introducing AI, computer vision, and in such sectors as computer analysis, like MRI, when introducing artificial intelligence, which is the computer vision, that is the way we describe it, we're able to get preliminary tests in a much better quality than otherwise you can ensure in every separate clinic or hospital. So there is a special center where top-skilled HCPs can go through a great number of scans and give you the required decision. Another example that I wanted to share with you, which is in the area of safety. During the past year, by using external operator services with the facial recognitions and other systems, we're able to apprehend, just using computer technologies, 7,000 people out of 30, which were put on the wanted list because of various severe criminal activities. And that helps the law enforcement work. That is really something that remains outside of our general awareness. And the number of cars stolen because we have this computer vision in the city has gone down almost 10 times over the past 10 years. And that is also the result of the digitalization that we are able to observe on a daily basis. So speaking about the city having the state is something that you also have to dispose of in an appropriate and correct way. And the kind of resources that are available to you is something that you should apply as much as possible. Now, if you are to ask, are we to share this with other regions? This is something that we also do. All of the digital solutions and the software that we are producing, we are happily sharing out. We have such a service which is called Rospass. We are the first ones to set it up, which is related to travelers, and the majority of the Russian regions are getting connected to it. This is a very convenient service to book a hotel or an excursion. Not only Moscow is part of it because we started with it ourselves, but other regions are now part of it, and that is a very comfortable thing to plan your travel. And there are many services for businesses. There is a supplier portal that Moscow has, but also 39 other regions are using it. That is small volume procurement, and the volume of procurement from the regions is growing. The suppliers all across the country use this service, and so this is the kind of services that we are happily sharing out with our counterparts in different regions, as well as many other services. Whenever we get a request, we are sharing it on a gratis basis. So we've got these priorities in our work, and whatever experience we generate, this digital divide is something that is not correctly to describe, but the kind of digital achievements that we're able to do, we're always ready to provide to our colleagues in the other regions. Thank you so much. Truly. Moscow has a very interesting experience. It is really moving very quickly. I am hearing it from many financial institutions. There are many projects that Moscow introduces and new technologies, and I am sure that we will be cooperating in the future. My next question is to Sergey about the future of the financial market. What the financial market players should bear in mind in these new technologies? And what are the key technologies, do you think, which may affect the development of the financial services and financial sector? Yes, thank you very much, everybody. Good evening. It's great to see the full room. Yeah, the digital today is defining and will define the development of the financial market for a long time to come. The digital is our everything. And so speaking about what's in store for us, we're not strongly changing this agenda at the Finnopolis conference. So in terms of the question, how fast, I would say that artificial intelligence, the deep machine learning, and then changing the low skill sets, starting from the car drivers and various operators and on and on and on. And so this whole discourse about the value of energy and the computational technology is really the key one, because the barriers in terms of the speed, I would split into two parts. Technology is where we are more or less okay. We have sufficiently smart engineers, and the base is global, no matter what kind of obstacle there may be. We do have access to the parts. But there is a second type of a barrier, which is a mental one, a mindset. And so speaking about the speed of introducing various innovations, one should always consider the extent to which the society is ready to embrace it, to what extent the regulator is ready to let it go. Because we're currently talking about the kind of estimations that are not subject to administrative control and free from any political sanctions. But if we are saying that this kind of an estimation is there for one kind of regulator that is not capable of blocking it, that would mean that a different kind of regulator won't be able to do it either. And so the question about how you can use AI is crucially important, because in my view, whatever is being done right now is being done correctly, for the benefit of productivity of labor, but to a large extent, AI helps better and quicker to market it. And it's not that we are able to produce a customized product for an individual and make it useful, but rather what is easier to market and sell today. I mean, steps are being undertaken which enable one to sell more into a single pair of hands. Now, does a human being need it? Nobody's asking a question. I mean, the one who makes a greater profit, he is the right entity. And so this infamous that we have these KPIs, the end-of-year profit, and there are different deferrals, but that is not of principal significance. So I believe that the future is in the B2C, not that, but the M2M. What I mean, when an AI is not only going to be on the side of the businesses, which thanks to all of the properties and capabilities of AI can faster, cheaper, with greater quality, provide services to households and human beings, but also on the side of a human being, when a human being is relieved from the need to make a choice and allow the AI to make it for the human being, but the kind of AI which is not working for the businesses. And so such vendors are going to emerge anyway. And the fact that we're creating the single space for the data, we're sharing this technology, is really making this future come closer. Although classically we are undervaluing what is going to happen within the decade, we are overestimating what will happen within the next 2 years. And so the new topic, DeFi, it already has been referred to during the conference here, and it sounds strange. We're talking about DeFi, but at the same time we are talking about the brokers and some kind of exchanges that would be the funnel for the digital financial assets, where you don't have any brokers, no exchanges. There is a customer and there is a supplier, and in between them there is no chain of intermediaries. And that is exactly related to the mindset of acquisition, because people today are not ready. Even when they buy an apartment, for example, I'm on the board of directors of one of the construction developers, and you can take a look through the virtual reality of the kind of apartments which are not yet there physically, because they're being built to walk around it, move your furniture around. Using AI functionality, you can get some advice, so you don't have a human being, but an AI produces it with a artificial voice. And we see that people are not really keen to use this service. They need to have a living realtor with whom they are able to share the accountability for a rare choice, because it is not every day that we're buying a property. Some buy a property only once in a lifetime. And so to make the full decision is difficult for a human being, because a human being needs to talk to somebody and needs sometimes to be even pushed a little bit. And that is why the marketing technology, using it really nicely, because they're not expensive, because in the past, the bond market used to have people with several million of dollars, because the cost of servicing such customers was very high. Now technology even enables somebody who has a capital of $1 to invest it, and that brings about a mass phenomenon. And so reducing this cost and making it possible for a human being also to apply AI, which is not AI on the side of the seller, but on the buyer, and that is what will make DeFi take off, because people are not able to visit 15 marketplaces simultaneously in order to buy, I don't know, a plasticine for a school kid. For example, they go to one of the marketplaces and buy it by an avatar which will do this routine thing for a customer doesn't have a problem visiting 15 marketplaces and exactly find the plasticine with the best cost-value ratio. And only then that would make brokers disappear, the one who are offering securities to an individual customer. Exchanges will disappear, which concentrate in a single place this habitual understanding of different financial instruments as options. Now, how quickly that may happen, I believe much quicker than we can imagine. I believe that the fiduciary management programs that we can see now on the basis of AI amongst the major players already have various elements whereby help is being granted subconsciously to customers what to buy and how to buy it. So the second very important point when we talk about the future, virtual reality, VR, as strange as it may sound, the young generation, and for example in Japan, there are almost 20% of teenagers who are ready to escape from the real world and live in the virtual world, which in their mind is much more versatile and interesting, and completely give up on the kind of values which at least my generation finds quite habitual, and live in the different value set. And so in such a virtual reality, there is money as well. And moreover, cryptocurrencies originally emerged in the computer games where certain tokens were being earned that one could use to buy certain elements of that the game, in order to do the game you needed to have. And so if in virtual reality you would disconnect yourself from it, this virtual reality will swerve off into its own path. And we need to take into account these things so that the financial sector shouldn't forget about the things such as virtual reality. And so this BSD is a very important project because the central banks cannot afford it to happen there, so that the national currencies would ignore a big part of the social life, because that must reflect the value exchange, even if the majority of the population doesn't see it to be a value. And so the virtual sword that you win after you pass through virtual walls have the right to exist because there is a great number of people for whom this virtual sword is a tangible value. And so this particular turnover must not escape the attention, even when you estimate the country's GDP. The last thing, which is less romantic and more close to us, of course, the market is going to be moving in fits and starts. There are big organizations which are, thanks to the economy of scale, can afford to run experiments, such as the government organizations as Kurchatov Institute and certain banks have already been mentioned today here. Then there are others who don't have this economy of scale. They cannot spread themselves thin, and they will need to follow somebody else's trail. And that is the right thing to do, because if everybody is going to go and create one's own cloud, because the cloud thing can be done by few organizations, but to use clouds is a totally different story. So you shouldn't strive towards having every institution to be the best one. No, it should have 80% of what it does outsourced, but the remaining 20, it must be able to do better than anybody else, and then it would be competitive. So looking at the market, looking at the way it is all evolving, and based on your resource set, I would suggest that you should pay attention to substituting routine things with AI, be mindful of improving productivity of labor, but also at the probability of the kind of investments that you generate in your own development to be rational, because there are so many irrational things. We've got a whole slew of small banks, each of which is producing their own system rather than just buying a ready-made box solution. That would have been much cheaper, and the regulator would find it much more effective if many financial market players would move into the cloud, and they should simply just allow for that to be done and then maintain supervisory thing. But there is a second part of the problem. If we let the AI go, it is very important for us to be able to control it. So it won't be possible to turn the switch down, because if all of your recordings have been deleted about your balances in various financial institutions, by putting the switch on, you won't be able to find your securities or your coins. This is going to be a big chaos and a big problem. So practically we are not have no
Центральный банк Российской Федерации, другие центральные банки, это все равно элементы, которые вот без
paper money left. So these are the kind of elements that won't be able to survive without electricity. But I do agree that there's no way to fight a steel rod without having a steel rod. So to control such a complicated thing as AI, a human being is not capable of. So in addition to the cybersecurity, there also should be a good regulation in place, without which a regulator won't be able to allow this whole story to develop actively into the future. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. Well, I should say that some players in the financial market, not only them, are running different experiments, trying to feel out for new technologies. I think somebody yesterday described them as romantic projects, while others are not able to afford to do it and act in a more pragmatic way. Yes, of course, it would have been great to have the boxed solutions available, but in a technology fight with major competitors, they will run out of time waiting for the boxed solutions being granted to them. So it's also important to make sure that any technology future is not being fenced in within a certain monopoly. This is something that we should not forget about either. And there's a very interesting thing that you mentioned in terms of customization taking place on the basis of AI acting on behalf of not of the seller, but more on the side of a consumer. And I feel that this is indeed something that should happen and would be conducive to the introduction of new financial products. Well, now to the banking sector. So, if one may say, from general things to specifics. You have been experimenting as well with some technologies, right? In some cases, you were following somebody else's trail, looking at what others are doing, but you have also been experimenting. Now, where have you been able to do things right, where the technology really paid off? And what were the errors? What were mistakes? And for the future, what kind of niches, what kind of new innovative services that you can imagine for yourselves in the future? Well, there are two questions that are interrelated. Let me begin with the first one. By nature, I'm very self-critical. If we've been able to omit noticing something, I'm not afraid to say. But speaking about the Alfa-Bank and the Russian banking sector generally, then in terms of any big mistakes in technology, we didn't do that. The Russian fintech is the best fintech in the world. This is not just a slogan. This is a true fact. Well, look, in Europe, major players have slapped on the daily banking technology and digitalization of the routine operations and transactions. And so they have Revolut. We didn't sleep on this. We have Alfa-Bank mobile app, and several big banks can really set a handicap to Revoluts of the world in terms of functionality and whatever. In America, Robinhood. The major players have overlooked this trend in the brokerage business, again, brokerage applications in Russia. There's no place for such players in Russia, because big players in Russia didn't miss out on noticing that that was the new way. even at the household level. I'm sure that your friends are calling you, I mean, some of them who have left the country, and had this direct experience of the way fintech works in all possible other countries. So you must be able to understand how well advanced the customer technology experience is in Russia. And so it seems to me there are no omissions. And I was trying to decide for myself, why is it? And I found three reasons. First is about human beings. I mean, in every country, you have your own educational legacy. In Russia, people are creative, people are innovative, and that is our strength, particularly if an attractive company and the banking industry and advanced banks are attractive. That means that we concentrate even a greater mass of very creative and innovative guys. Second reason, competition, and not only competition between companies in Russia. You have several major players, and their executives are competing between themselves on a personal basis. Who is faster, who is better? It may sound routine, but there are several people who are the leaders of major organizations who compete against each other, and they push everything forward. The third reason is the environment. The kind of environment within which we operate. In the first place, this is really thanks to our regulator and the government, but in the first place, the central bank. The kind of the digital environment that provides us with flexibility, the regulatory environment, even the way we are passing through this crisis. The banking industry, I think, is much more stable than any other Russian industry in going through the crisis. Nobody in the West expected it to be that way. Everybody thought that we would flop down and that would be it. No, everything is working. And during this crisis, the central bank, as it has been doing lately, very professionally, in a tough way, in some other ways, in an easy way, creating the proper environment. And I really think that we are so lucky that we have you, Elvira, and your team. And I'm sure that everybody in this room, the professionals representing the banking industry, are going to join me in these words. So, we didn't really miss out on anything. But there is a new trend out there that is currently taking place and evolving. I described it for myself, a mobile bank rather than a mobile app. There's a little difference in wording, but fundamentally what happens, digitalization in Russia and throughout the whole world was evolving through smartphones and built-in apps. We were dependent upon mobile apps depending upon two platforms, Apple and Android. Previously, we thought that we can have them like air, and now it turned out that somebody may cut us from it. Thanks to the central bank, Visa and MasterCard living in the country really didn't create any problem, and we didn't see anything because we were thinking that Apple and Android would always be available. But one should say that there's not only our Russian local problem. In Europe, they realize that, and they are now looking into passing the necessary laws. Durov is complaining that Telegram is having problems in terms of clearing through various regulatory barriers. And so there's going to be a transition from mobile apps towards other means of customer support, web, internet, I mean, in the first place, online banks, not just mobile banks. That's where we try to dig into, and honestly, we're not looking into it so deeply, neither Alfa-Bank nor the whole of the industry, but that is where you find much greater freedom to create. You don't have to update anything there. Whatever you do is what your customer gets instantly. It's not really important what kind of smartphone you have or how much money you paid for it. If you're a student and your smartphone is not full capacity or hard capacity, that really doesn't mean anything. Through web technologies, you can enjoy the same kind of services like the state-of-the-art iPhone. So many advantages. Of course, you will need to do some work here, and so we believe that towards the end of the next year, our online application is not going to be at all inferior to a mobile bank. Along with it, after the web services will go into the messengers such as Telegram and VK. So this paradigm change from mobile apps, in a broader sense of it, to mobile banking rather than mobile application, is a big trend in Russia and for the fintech for the next few years to come. I am convinced of that. Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting observation about the way the banking business may develop. But I've got another question to you, and after that I may pass the same one to Sergey. So this technology development that we're seeing, where new technologies appear, and on the basis of these new technologies, there are new ways of organizing business processes. And here at the forum, actually, we spoke a lot about the decentralized finance. And in many ways, this is a challenge to the banking sector. I mean, to the old form of organizing financial sector. Do you see it as a risk? Do you see it as a kind of a challenge that you can embrace, or build a hybrid model, or you are not noticing it, for example, DeFi that the whole world is talking about? So what's your take on that? DeFi, I think this is an obvious trend, but this is a bit longer term. And this is exactly the example of a technology when in a centralized way, the government and the regulator must do it for the market. But it seems to me that it would not be developing in rapid pace. So there has to be a crucial mindset change. And so we're not afraid of this technology. Most importantly for us is to organize our work in such a way so that we can always be at the very vanguard of it. We've got hundreds of teams in Alfa-Bank. They're very much independent. They are making their own decisions. Honestly, I am not aware of what they're doing. So if there's DeFi, they will build it. And so continuously, they are generating certain things. So my task, as I'm always saying, is to set the priorities, current priorities, long-term priorities. And I'm always telling to my team, hey, guys, we need to spend our resources right here and now. We've got this year's business plan, maybe next year's business plan, sales, and what is going to feed us in 3-5 years' times, certain more strategic things. So if the executive is trying to make sure that he's got this creative environment, that people have this authority delegated to it, and no bureaucracy, and to control current and strategic technologies, no matter what kind of disruptive technologies appear in the world, no matter what regulators come up with, everything is going to be working fine. So Alfa-Bank has been and will remain the best bank in the country. All right. Yes, Sergey? What would you say? Well, several years ago, I was searching for some kind of a technology breakthrough, and I was thinking, computers really have improved productivity, so what's going to be next? And at a certain point in time, it seemed to me that crowdsourcing was the kind of technology breakthrough where humanity achieves the possibility to unite everybody's brains, and thanks to it, there would be a new synergy or a new quality attained. But somehow later on, it turned out that this thing doesn't work. Individualism, alpha males, the profit centricity, that was disrupting this societal romantic concept of the common good. Maybe there were certain examples where this common community thing is functioning, but I'm not really much believing in it. And so I don't really think that such a construction as DeFi is going to create effective barriers against abuse. And any, this is simply having trust in pure technology. Technology can be for evil as well as for good. For example, every year, computer productivity doubles, and it all is being used to counter cyber attacks. And so I believe 90% of the productivity growth is being expensed in order to counter that. Maybe the computer manufacturers are creating these cyber attacks in order to justify for what they do. I don't know. But this is a problematic idea, saying that finance could be fully decentralized. I think that is going to be developing as a hybrid model. The regulators' digital maturity would enable the things to be let go. But looking at the way the international regulators are treating Bitcoin, been or have been, and all of a sudden, in 10 years' time down the road, they realize that that was evil. That was a very long-term experiment for them to understand what comes out of it. So far, no great thing has come out of it, and so this regulatory-free environment hasn't really demonstrated itself to be good for the consumers. So I believe this is going to be difficult, and this difficulty somehow is in the lack on the human side of having an independent ability to assess things, because a human being has a certain limited experience in interacting with distributed systems. So a human being has always to rely upon the herd instinct. I mean, if everybody uses it, I'm going to use it as well. But as soon as there's a whole mass of not very well skilled users, there are wolves appearing who would like to, gobble up all sheep. I mean, Western regulators decided to go in a very simple way. We are disclosing information. Whatever you don't understand is your problem. But eventually, they are compensating certain things whenever people take to the streets. So the regulators in the emerging markets demonstrate a more cautious approach. So they blow much more often on water. So as a concept, I'm sure that is going to move forward. But being an element which is in a foreseeable future is capable of creating a real competition to centralized, even non-digital finance. I really don't believe in that. Thank you. Well, the way I understand it, we had a discussion yesterday that DeFi without the CeFi would find it very difficult to survive. And so you can talk about the regulator's role here as well, but nevertheless, my question is where I will bring us back to technology. Many technologies are very costly. Even if some of the companies are going to tread the way into the future by filling out for things and would be ready to invest. I mean, we are going through the times when not many can afford it, but in terms of technology development, in many industries, there's a big role that is currently being played by the government, which acts as an initiator, an investor, a coordinator for certain major technology projects. In the financial industry, we as the regulator have focused primarily upon infrastructure. I mean, not on commercial developments, but infrastructure. So, looking into the future, what kind of role can the government and should the government play in order not to stifle the private initiative when it is not yet clear what will produce effect, what won't produce effect, when you have to spend a lot of money on it right now, considering also the fact that currently we do not have the kind of ability that we used to acquire technologies when we now have to produce a lot ourselves. So what can be the role of the government here? And I would like to first direct my question to the Moscow representative. What could be your role as the federal subject in initiating such things? Well, we're trying to produce a certain request towards the kind of change that would enable us to deal with the emerging challenges. And I gave you the example of secure city and safe city. Facial recognition as the issue, it came to be recently. And so originally what we were tasking ourselves here was to apply it to the city in a safe environment in this city. Developing a product is not such an expensive thing. We definitely knew what the outcome could be, but there was a high level of uncertainty. And so we created a sandpit, so to say, into which we let several operators who are providing us with such a service. And through that, each of them were able to produce their own software. And so at the outcome, we were able to enjoy the best quality out of the possible options. So right now, when this service is much cheaper than it used to be in the beginning, we can use such technologies in our everyday life when, for example, you're using facial recognition when paying for subway. This is the kind of application, the kind of role that we see ourselves being best at. And that applies to other IT areas. For example, in healthcare, we are, of course, providing impersonal access to computer images when, for example, developing the software that would enable developers to create the preliminary diagnostics. And that is the kind of the database approach which enables specialty companies who produce such software to fine-tune quality, to improve the effectiveness of the products that they turn out. And also, what we've previously were mentioning, the subsequent transfer of such technologies into the regions, into other sectors, because without doubt, the government is a very powerful customer, a very capable customer, also in IT area. And so the kind of technical scope that we present to manufacturers is then being replicated into other activities. We were talking about the electric transport. For example, electric bus that runs throughout Moscow was created from scratch based on our design scope. And so the electric buses that are being manufactured by our two factories is not worse at all compared to the electric buses manufactured by the international automobile companies. The same you can mention about the street cars that we're currently updating, and the subway cars, in terms of many of its properties and characteristics, are much better than foreign-made. So that is the ability for us to act as a major customer and promote better technologies and then push it into other sectors. I've got a question to finances, and speaking about the financial sector and introducing new technologies into finance. So how do you see the government, what it could do here? I mean, our role here as a regulator, because Vladimir was saying that we should act as the customer who buys a product, but I don't know how applicable it is in the directly to the financial industry. Hardly likely at such a scale, maybe at the regional scale, indeed. For example, an individual card for a city person. But speaking about the financial industry and technology development, against this fogginess that the technology development can be described as, what should be the role of the government in a broader sense and the regulator here in a narrower sense of it? Well, it seems to me that currently we have a very proper balance, not to be in the way for the businesses, but at the same time certain things are happening, because quite often, where's the players, we cannot come to an agreement. Or quite often there is a project which a single financial entity would find very dear to implement. So the fast payment system, then the household and corporate digital ID project. Sergey said they don't believe in that. Neither do I. And yesterday I was also saying that I don't really trust in the open banking or open finance when the banks are being forced to really pass their customer data to whoever it is. If you release this personal data to small players, that would be a security hassle. But if you give it to other industries players would be able to earn their billions of what the banks were trying to very diligently collect. So you go into the open data where the government services, like if you want to get some sort of an official paper or official confirmation, that households would easily go it, and the banks would really support this happening. Sergey, do you have any thinking about it? To look at oneself, yeah. In the past, what would you have wished yourself to do? Well, in Moscow, for example, there are parkings and traffic planning and the forecast of the number of vehicles. I mean, Moscow is a great city in organizing its parking spaces. The same applies to the data centers. If Moscow sees itself as a technology hub, through concessions, we really don't have enough data centers. In a modern world, a data center shouldn't be a bottleneck. And so Moscow could easily provide such concessions. Particularly, there is a new Moscow territory. You don't have to have it all downtown, particularly since because of certain considerations, we go back to the distributed data centers. The standard in the past was 700 kilometers, in between the main data center and the backup data center. I think Moscow Moscow misses a little bit of that. As far as the federal level of regulation is concerned, it seems to me that we are really, the market and the regulator are having such a intense debate about it. Everything is very clear, and we basically have to simply go and do it, particularly Federal Law number 115, which for different customer databases in different ways creates different functionality. So the single platform will really level things out. Biometry has to be there. You must not have the kind of competition based on somebody able to stake out a single piece of the market and not letting anybody in. And what about the customer data? Well, it's difficult to say. The model where a customer conscientiously puts in a birdie, nobody believes in it. We all put in birdies in different forms, accept cookies, accept something else. You don't always understand what these cookies are and how they taste. So I believe the level of abuse originally is going to be enormous, but the households are learning. And if indeed, the distribution of data, if done improper, would create social problems, I believe that the pendulum will swing in the other direction. And so this open data concept is something that I wouldn't really give up on. I do believe that through the sheer effect of scale, smaller players simply don't have any chance without being able to compete at the technology level. They don't have any chance of being able to get the necessary data. So either we part with small players or we find peace in allowing the customers dispose of their own data. Well, we've got very little time left, and now I would like to raise a question to all of the panelists, and I would ask you to come back with very short answers. In this room, we have a lot of young fintech stars. This morning, we were looking at the hackathon results. It's so inspirational. Simply, you get inspired by what our young colleagues are doing. Well, just imagine that they have come to ask you for an advice. I mean, not highly probable in real life, but what is the technology that you would recommend them to go for? I mean, this could be a different type of technology, different level of technology, but what would you recommend them to go for? Well, that is not a question to me. I would advise them to come and work for a bank. No. I would advise them to invest into themselves, into their human skills. As I was saying, in Russia, all of the guys are very creative, very innovative, very ingenious. And so to add soft skills to it, like personal development, technology is always technology. You would be able to do something definitely. So you can choose anyone you want. Invest into yourself, into your own development, into your human potential rather than technology. Vladimir? Well, technology has this property of continuously changing. So speaking about today, we can see that very often we use artificial intelligence, and we see a future in microelectronics and moving from it into photonics. These are the kind of future journeys that we believe are having the right potential. Mikhail? Nature-based. May I tell you a joke, please? Subway, I think, in Moscow. So there's a person who has had a few cups. And so a little boy comes to it and says, I was disembarking now. And this man is thinking, if I'm telling the boy that I'm disembarking, I would need to step aside and let him go. And he turns around and says, listen, boy, whether I'm disembarking or not doesn't mean anything. The most important thing for you, boy, is to do well at school. Sergey? Well, I'm of the opinion that business people represent an important element in any society. So before you sell yourself to Alfa-Bank, I will try and become a businessman to create some sort of startup. But if you run up against the wall, then you should try and sell your knowledge or skills or anything in the open market. Just one word, Elvira, if I may. I wanted to say a word about Moscow. I even wrote it down here. Vladimir, like what you were saying, I got an employee, a female employee. She lost an earring with a diamond. So she came to me and she said, what am I to do? I told her, call the shop where you bought it. She made a phone call, and in 20 minutes' time, they brought these earrings. They took a look at all of the cameras and they traced when she was walking out and they found the earring lying down on the pavement. You see, the good people they are. Well, the reply to the last question that everybody was trying to respond to, not about an earring, demonstrated that technology is such a thing that is very difficult to talk about in terms of its future, particularly, relating yourself to some future technology is very difficult. So financial people are very pragmatic, and Alfa-Bank is saying that it is looking only into right here and now, and in the best of cases, how many you said, 3 or 5 years? So short term. And I suppose, understandably, those who are doing business are looking at the practical side of technologies in the first place. But at the same time, we're all afraid to miss out on the technology wave. And so this picture of change, which I think, despite the fact that there are so many experts, there's so many different views, to be able to understand what will work, what won't, is difficult. But nevertheless, in terms of what is currently going on, it is very important to follow it, to understand, to be aware of it, so as to simply not lose from your side the kind of advantages that you can gain or keep. We started this forum with the plenary session with the topic of how to keep up the pace. And indeed, the financial sector was able to advance itself. And this is not just praising oneself. We can see it through the people who are using these services. We are truly advanced. And in order not to lose it, not to slow down the pace. It's not enough for us to keep up the bar that we have been able to reach up to, although this is not an easy thing to do. We need to develop ourselves technologically. And so I felt, out of what I've heard today and yesterday, that customer centricity is a property of our business, and everybody mentioned it. In Moscow City also mentioned it. And I recall several years ago, financial sector practically was silent about it. The banks were talking about the profitability, earnings, risk management, ratios of all sorts and kinds. But if the customer is happy, then we're not even learning how to measure it. And so I believe that measuring your effectiveness through your customers, and our customers now became picky and very demanding. And so I feel that we won't disappoint our customers. And overall, this Finopolis event is revolving around it, to try and provide businesses and households with good, sound financial services. And debating all these things, we are in partnership, we are in an argument that will help us achieve this. And so I would like to thank the panelists here for the way you were able to share your views. Thank you so much.